Entrepreneurial Strategy Series. We call this the ESS series. We hold it the last Thursday of every month at 12 noon. You know, we've been trying out the networking before, so we'd love to hear your feedback. My name is David Postolski. I am a partner at Gearhart Law. I've been there for almost 10 years. I'm a intellectual property and patent attorney. My fellow partner and founder, Richard Gearhart, will be co-hosting today's event. So maybe he can introduce himself first, and then we'll have Brian and Michael introduce themselves directly. Go for it, Rich.
Well, thank you, David. It's a pleasure to be here. I always enjoy these ESS sessions, and I think, as I mentioned before the program started, all the credit for this goes to David Postolski, who dreamed this up and has made it work. And you know, our mission as a law firm that caters to entrepreneurs and small businesses and startups is to provide information and education to our clients, because we want everybody to you know, really have a mind that's open to all the possibilities that are out there for themselves and for their businesses. And that's really what we're all about. We started with a goal of trying to help 500 new businesses start, and we've far exceeded that now. I think we're over 4,000. And so we're very proud of the help that we've given to entrepreneurs and our clients, helping them move into the world of business, and this program is really a part of that whole process. So very glad to be here. Really looking forward to the program today. And you know, really, you should feel free to put questions in the chat. I know that there's going to be gazillions of them, so feel free to participate as much as you can. So
amazing. Thank you, Rich. Thank you. Yeah, definitely put your questions in the chat. We will have an opportunity to ask some questions live later. And we will be, of course, we're recording this, and so we will send this out to all attendees afterwards. Very excited for this program as well. I will start with Mike Shapiro. Maybe you can introduce yourself for a little bit so everybody knows who you are. That would be great.
Sure. Thanks so much, and thanks for having me. I'm Michael Shapiro. I'm the founder and CEO of Tap Into. For those of you who don't know, Tap Into is a network of more than 95 franchised online local news and digital marketing platforms. We're primarily in New Jersey, but we also have locations in New York, Florida, and Pennsylvania. And it's great to be here today.
Amazing. And I saved Brian to be second, to be last, actually. Brian is a fellow attorney. Brian, if you can introduce yourself, that'd be great.
Yeah, no, great. And thanks for having me. I think this is a great platform that you have. It's pretty amazing, 4,000 businesses that you guys have launched and helped, which is great. I'm an attorney. I'm a partner at the Entrepreneurial law firm. We started this firm 2012, but I've been working with franchises for over 20 years. Charles, my partner, and myself have worked together for a really long time. And our law firm is really franchisor specific. We do represent some franchisees, but we currently have 290 franchise brands that we represent on a national and international basis. So anyone who wants to franchise in the US can come to us, but we have clients all over the world, you know, that look to franchise in the US. So we help them with their FDD, which we're going to learn about today, what that means, the franchise disclosure document. Also with their intellectual property, because it's a related issue in franchising. There's a lot of intellectual property components to it. There's real estate components to it. There's insurance, contract. So the good thing about franchising and franchise law is that it really hits every single other law category out there. And we get to kind of be involved with that all the time. So it's yeah, so it's great. Looking forward to giving any information I can about the process, and looking forward to the presentation.
Great. Let's begin. I ended with you because we're starting with you, Brian.
Okay.
They're definitely for we just had a kind of quick networking session. There's definitely people that have varying degrees of knowledge as to what franchising even is. Maybe you can give us you know, the legal 101 on franchising from your point of view. That would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So franchising, you know, it's funny, we just had a conversation in the breakout room, and I think it kind of defines in a nutshell what franchising is. You know, Richard was talking about how it took a long time. You know, anytime you start a business, it takes a long time to learn the business, right? You make mistakes, you correct them, and hopefully you correct systems and move on. To me, if you ask me what one line of franchising is, it's essentially a way of a potential business owner really shortcutting the timeline of entrepreneurship, because you're going to sign on with a brand that hopefully made those mistakes, created systems around those mistakes to avoid those mistakes, and as you'll be more profitable because of that, because of their mistakes, instead of making them on your own. Right. So really, it's just a shortcut on the timeline. Let's say if it would take you 5 years to go get that experience and learn that process, it would shortcut that, you know, instantly, and you would have that instant experience that you can benefit from, right? Which means more money, you know, less mistakes, and hopefully a more successful business, more freedom. So to me, that's not really the legal answer, but to me, that's really what franchising is. It's a shortcut to learning a great business, you know, and a great business model. So on the legal front, the franchising, the definition is a little more complex. Really, the genesis of the franchise law is what we call the franchise disclosure document. It's short for FDD. That's the common term. So essentially, the Federal Trade Commission, you know, this is in the 60s and 70s, wanted to combat prospective franchisees from getting ripped off by franchisors, right? So there was a lot of things going on. People would say, give me $50,000, I'll guarantee you're going to make $1 million if you buy this franchise. They would give the $50,000, you wouldn't see them again, or there was no support, or things were happening like that. So to combat that, you know, fraud, I get for lack of a better term, the federal government said, hey, if you want to sell a franchise, you have to provide this packet of information to prospective franchisees. And that packet of information is now what is the FDD, the franchise disclosure document. So from a legal perspective, really what franchising is that compliance, that disclosure, and there's similar disclosure requirements, let's say for securities law, right? If I'm going to invest in a company, I need to have this disclosure packet. So it's basically a disclosure packet of information for a prospective franchisee. And if you want to sell a franchise in the United States, you have to comply with the Federal Trade Commission's rules, and those rules include providing that information. So from a legal perspective, it's about disclosure, and then, you know, I think we'll maybe get a little more in detail about the FDD itself, but there's a little more to it, but that's essentially what it is.
That's great, Brian. And so really, as part of the franchise process, you create this fairly detailed legal agreement, and then you actually, do you file that with the government, or and then they review it and approve it? Is that how it works?
That's a great question. So the Federal Trade Commission does not require filing. Okay. And their position is to all the states can either rely on the federal guidelines and laws, or they can tack onto those. So there are what we call registration states. New York, as an example, is a registration state. If you want to sell franchises in New York, you have to file the FDD with the Attorney General's office. They review all the information. They may want some changes. This process takes months for New York specifically. As opposed to New Jersey, you cross a bridge, they rely solely on the federal law. So the day you have your FDD, you can sell in New Jersey. And that's the distinction. So there's really three different type of states, different types. One is the registration state. California, Illinois, New York, Maryland, Virginia. They take a hard position on it and really scrutinize that docket, that packet of information. The non-registration states like New Jersey take no position, and then just say, as long as you're complying with federal law, you can sell franchises in New Jersey. And then there's an in-between, what we call filing states, Texas, Florida, for example, where we have to just tell them, we're going to sell franchises in your state. We don't have to send them the FDD, but we have to just get their approval to sell in their state.
So I think, what you're really saying is that if you're planning to do a franchise or get involved with a franchise, it's very important to have a knowledgeable, skilled franchise attorney who can advise you on this, because it does sound, very complicated, and this is not something that you can do yourself, right? So you really need good legal counsel. So Michael, I wanted to ask you, you decided to start your business as a franchise. And so what were the considerations that led you to make this business decision? And then on the opposite side, what do you tell prospective franchisees about what the advantages are of using, going the franchise route?
Sure. So I started Tap Into by creating an online local news site in New Providence, New Jersey. I did that October of 2008. And then people in neighboring towns reached out to me and said, hey, can you start this in our town? And I did. And I built it to the point where I was doing about 5 Tap Into sites myself. And I left my job to do it full time. And then I kept getting more and more requests from people to expand to their town. But I couldn't do any more sites myself. And so then I started thinking, well, how could we expand yet keep it really local? And so initially I came up with the idea of licensing, which we'll talk about in a little while. But and so our initial folks were licensees. What we found though with our licensees was that they needed a lot more support from us than you're allowed to provide under a traditional license situation. And also when it's a license situation, you're in effect renting, you're not owning. And so after about 9 months.
So Michael, so you are an attorney too, right? So
not a franchise attorney, but yeah, I was. I
went over from the dark side and became a business owner. So can you explain the difference between a licensing arrangement and a franchise arrangement?
Yeah, I can explain kind of like the basics. So, under a license, you're in effect renting the platform or whatever you're doing. And the licensor is limited in how much support they can provide to you. And those are really the 2 key differences. Whereas with a franchise, the franchisor can provide unlimited support. And also under a franchise system, the franchisee owns the business, which gives them the right to sell it. And build equity in their business, which I think is a key distinction. So that's why we went to converted from a license to a franchise, and we started franchising in December of 2013. And today we have 95 franchise Tap Into sites. In terms of why somebody would want to franchise, there's one is the key thing as Brian was talking about was about the knowledge base, obviously, that because we've now been doing this 15 years. And so we stumbled at times and we learned a lot and we evolved and we became stronger and stronger, and we impart that knowledge to a new franchisee who enters the system. But there's other reasons too to become a franchisee. One is the collaboration amongst the franchisees, which is very strong and powerful. The sharing of ideas, which also helps us improve as a company, but also improves the franchisee experience, and also the ability to scale your resources. So because we're a franchise system, we're able to provide to our franchisees systems they can use to make their lives a lot easier that we couldn't do if we were not a franchise system. Because when the franchisees are paying us their franchise fees, we're able to use that money to improve our technology, to come up with new features, to develop new services that we can offer to our franchisees, without which we wouldn't have the resources to be able to do that, nor would we necessarily have the ideas to do these things, because some of our best ideas have come from our franchisees who've said, hey, like for example, last year, hey, Mike, can we, instead of having contracts that for our advertisers where they're print contracts and we're emailing them and faxing them and stuff like that and scanning them, can we have a system like DocuSign? So we purchased DocuSign for all our franchisees, and now it's seamless. They can go into a business and actually even sell them, advertising, have them sign on their cell phone while they're in the appointment, which has obviously made a huge difference for all of our franchisees as they're making their money with their franchise. Those are the kinds of things that oftentimes come from our franchisees and enable us to be better and provide the best possible service to them.
So, go ahead, David.
No, I was going to say, Brian, can you point to some differences between licenses and point to some key differences between being a licensor or a franchisor, or being a licensee or a franchisee? Can you point to some also?
Yeah. So I think Michael hit a lot. The point.
Go for it. I think we can hear you now. Your sound cut out for a minute.
Yeah, I think Michael hit on the main components of it, but from a strictly legal perspective, there's really three components to it, and this mistake happens all the time. It's a common thing. We have literature on it. I was part of a New York City bar paper on it. It's when a lot of people think they're licensing, but they're really franchising, and it's a mistake it's a common mistake. So the three main components of a franchise are a license of the trademark, the control, as Michael was saying, you have a certain amount of control, and it's for a fee, right? So if you have those three things, you have a franchise pretty much in every jurisdiction. Some jurisdictions vary to a certain degree. So one of but the two main ones are the trademark, right? So everybody's under the Tap Into It trade name. If they were using a different trade name and Michael is just providing the back end support, that really wouldn't be a franchise. That would just be back end consulting, whatever you want to call it, right? And that's where that distinction comes in. But this is franchise law is so driven on trademarks that because you could have situations where you have the same exact relationship, as long as that party is not using the trademark, it really isn't a franchise. But if you have those three components, you probably have a franchise no matter what you call it. You can call it a license, you can call it, consulting, you can call it whatever you want. And the agreement could be a license agreement, but it's still a franchise as far as the law is concerned. And then you run into situations, as you can imagine, because of those required disclosures and required filings and registrations. If you think you're operating as a license and legally, but you're really franchising, it creates a lot of issues there. So.
Yeah, I didn't know that. I didn't know that. I guess I kind of intuitively knew that, but I didn't really appreciate that the trademark is such an important fundamental piece of the whole franchise system. And I guess it kind of makes sense, right? Because one of the advantages of the franchise is brand recognition, right? So if you're starting a new business and you have to build your brand's recognition from scratch, right? There's a big investment, and you can be successful with that, or you may not be successful with that. But when you're looking into a franchise, you're stepping into a company that already has a brand and has recognition among customers, and that makes just the whole process of getting customers easier, right? So that's really an interesting and key point. Thanks for bringing up. But I wanted to get go ahead, Brian.
I'm sorry. Just one thing to that is, and it kind of goes, if you think about it, it kind of unravels the whole thing, because let's say we're licensing software from Microsoft. Microsoft doesn't care what we do with it, you know, how we operate our business from there. So they have no need to control us because their reputation is not relying on ours. As a franchisor, you know, we want to make sure we can control what other franchisees are doing. So that trademark and control component are interrelated with each other in that sense, because Michael would care what other franchisees are doing. If they're selling, you know, drugs off their site, right? It's going to be a problem for him as well, you know. So they're very interrelated with each other, but really the trademark is central to the whole thing.
That's very good. So I'll ask one more question. I guess I'll turn it over to David. And that is, you know, part of the attractiveness of being a franchisee is being your own boss, right? And so, you know, if you're headstrong like I was, and you really, you know, you really wanted to do your own thing, you know, having your own business is one way to do that. But that said, if you're a franchisee, you also have to obey the franchisee rules. So how do you kind of get that right balance within your organization, Michael, between sort of independence and also structure? So to make sure that the franchisee works.
Yeah, it's really important that, you know, basically we have to strike a balance between providing independence and the ability for people to be their own boss, with also making sure that they do not tarnish the brand that we've built. So like, for example, at Tap Into, each of our sites needs to do at least one original local news story per day. They have to be objective. They have to follow the Society of Professional Journalists ethics. Those are the main requirements that they have. And that's disclosed to them in advance. So they know going into it, hey, these are the rules that we need to follow. And that ensures that regardless of whatever Tap Into site you come to read, you're going to get the same kind of quality of the news, the objectivity, et cetera, which is really important. Because if you had, you know, a Tap Into site that was, you know, just giving its own opinion and not providing objective local news, that would undermine our credibility as a system and our reputation, as well as the credibility and reputation of all the other franchisees in the system. So, you know, it's important to strike that balance. But here at Tap Into, one of the things we've worked really hard on is enabling franchisees to have a lot of freedom within those constructs. So, for example, if they want their own sections on the site, if they want their own columns, we built our technology so that they can, you know, they can customize their site, they can customize their newsletter, et cetera. They can give it their own local, you know, look and feel, and give them as much freedom as possible so that they're able to, you know, have that independence while following the key basic rules that everybody in the system needs to follow.
So that's really interesting, because I kind of do think sometimes of like McDonald's as, you know, everybody seems to be marching in lockstep, right? I mean, I guess maybe some of the franchises have certain amounts of flexibility into like the shape of the building, and, you know, whether you have a play area or not, there seem to be some differences that way. But the basic products, the whole purpose is to make it absolutely identical, so you get the same kind of product no matter where you go. And I would imagine then that in that case, you don't have a lot of freedom. So I guess it really depends on the franchise, the franchisor, how much control they want to exert and how much is necessary, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's some franchises where like they literally, you know, dictate down to, you know, for example, in McDonald's, like, you know, the size of the patty and how it should be made, and you know, all of that kind of stuff. And you know, and certainly they have the right to do that. But it's a different kind of franchise than the kind of franchise that we operate, you know.
That's good.
Yeah, so Michael, I'm just curious about, I definitely want to get back to the intellectual property, specifically the trademark. How do you control, like, it sounds like you are giving some freedom to your 96 franchisees, but where does the freedom begin and end when it comes to your trademark? And what do you have trademarked? And then, yes, if you can talk about some of the control you know, have or don't have over the trademark with your franchisees.
Yeah, so I mean, we have at Tap Into, we have trademarked, Tap Into, our logo, our catch line, et cetera. So those are all trademarked. And so there's a number of ways that we kind of police the trademark, so to speak. First is that we have available at cost, so we don't mark it up, marketing materials and shirts and all that kind of stuff that has our trademark correct on it, that the franchisees can purchase at cost. In addition to that, we provide our logo and things like that on our intranet for our franchisees to use if they want to use an outside vendor or anything like that for their trade, for to print something like this. In addition to that, if a franchisee wants to go and say, hey, we want a banner up at the Little League field, they need to show me a proof of that banner before it goes live at that field, so I can just make sure that the trademark looks correct. Because if you have a situation where you don't police your trademark, there are laws and rules in place that say if you don't police your trademark, it can be, I can't remember the legal term, but it can basically be canceled. And you don't want that to happen, because if that happens, you have a major headache on your hands.
It's dilution.
Correct.
Dilution is-
Correct. Yes.
Yes.
You don't want your mark diluted. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
so Brian, from that perspective, there are some people on the call that have their own trademarks. There are probably people on the call that are running a business but have not registered their trademark federally. Possibly they have a state trademark or what we call a common law trademark. From your perspective, in kind of creating these types of agreements, how important is it to have something protected federally or stately or unregistered, but you're still using it as a trademark? Maybe you can talk about some of those differences and how important it is to the overall process.
Absolutely. Yeah, we run into the issue a lot, where we take a local business and now we're looking to launch it nationally. So we run into an issue where you're operating a business for 5 years. It could be a taco place. We say, okay, now we're ready to franchise. We have 3 locations in New Jersey, looking to franchise. Then we say, okay, let's register the trademarks, and we find out that someone in Kentucky has a federal a federal trademark, right, with USPTO, which creates obviously major issues for us. So I would say about 20% of the brands that we work with initially have to rebrand to a certain degree because of that, where they didn't really think about, they were thinking about selling tacos. They weren't thinking about trademarks and stuff. If I had a time machine, I can go back in time and say, before the other person filed or was using, how many times have you guys been through that as well? Where if we had a time machine, we'd say, go file this trademark, immediately, and you get that priority. So in the franchising space, it's you really can't franchise without a registered trademark. It really is. You can launch it with one. The USPTO takes a long time, as you know now, much longer time to get a response back. So we sometimes we launch with an application, not having a registered mark, but with the anticipation of getting a registered mark eventually. But ultimately, you're going to run into battles with common law users throughout the country, and there's no better weapon than to have a registered mark. It's the best you can get. It's not perfect, but that's the way I typically explain it. It's the best proof that you can have that you own the rights throughout the country. So it's critical. You can't really do without it. And if you do find a lot of times you'll be in a situation where there's a lot of local common law users. I don't want to fight that battle every time I try to go. I'm going to have to go into their territory. So we'll have to rebrand, to something a little more unique, whatever the case is. But it's, it's a problem.
Those are really important lessons. I think the takeaway for everyone is register your brand. Don't wait, and do that as quickly as possible and have an early filing date. But let's say you are a New York, let's take Michael's example. He was based in New Jersey. He had 5 or 6 other cities in New Jersey, I think he said. What if I just want to stay in New Jersey and I want to, hit the, 60 cities in New Jersey or something? Do I really have to? Should I be getting a New Jersey trademark or something like that? Have you worked on those types of hyper local franchises?
You know what? Even if they anticipate being local, I've been doing it long enough where, you know, the intent is to do a local, and they say, well, New York's right here, Pennsylvania's right here. So I assume that even if their intention is, and it's a lot of times the first couple of years you do roll out locally, right? It creates that efficiency until you learn how to really support franchisees. Our recommendation is, you know, if you're based in New Jersey, don't go to California for your first franchisee. So every time you have to support them, you have to get on a plane, right? It doesn't make sense. So usually we recommend, it doesn't always work out that way, but you know, slow expansion, you know, starting locally and then branching out. Even if Michael called me in 2008 and said, this is my intention and this is what I'm looking to do, I would still say get the trademark. It still makes sense. You know, there is some issue with, if you're not, you know, interstate commerce and things like that, getting past that issue. But I think if you're online, you're pretty much doing interstate commerce as far as I'm concerned. I don't, but so that would be the only thing. If my intent, even if my intention, I've seen situations, even almost outside the franchise space, where, you know, I had a hair salon that was operating for 10 years in Brooklyn, you know, and just operating, didn't plan to expand. A user comes in from overseas, comes here, you know, uses their foreign designation as far as, and they boxed them out. They made them rebrand even though they weren't looking to expand. So for me, I mean, I'll suggest any business, regardless of what the intention is today, to register, because it's not only offensive, but it's also defensive if you need to use it, you know.
Well said.
Yeah, and since we're doing a lot of lawyer talk here, I'm going to jump in and say, you know, the search is really sometimes as important as the trademark, because if you have a successful local business and you haven't checked out your name and you want to go national, as soon as you do that, you kind of put yourself out there. And if somebody else has a registered trademark and they're in your same area of business and they're using the same or similar name, you could have a lot of problems. So it's not just getting the trademark, it's avoiding people who already have trademarks. And so you need to make sure when you're, you know, and this, whether you're franchising or whether, you know, you're just starting out and just doing a regular business, it's really important to make sure that you have freedom to operate and that you can promote your brand and not have to go back 2 or 3 years later after you've made this huge investment in branding and packaging and websites and everything else, have to go back and change everything or get into a big legal dispute and pay a lot of legal fees. So the cost of actually checking that out is so small compared to all the other costs associated with doing a business. It's just, in my opinion, it's a no-brainer. And I always want to take this opportunity to point that out, because it's a mistake that we see all the time. And, you know, it's like Brian's time machine. I just wish that the due diligence had been done early in the company's life. So, yeah. So
another thing, Richard, just to add to that, you also have to consider the value of, you know, as the longer you have the registration, right, it becomes uncontestable over years. It builds strength the longer you have it, right? So it's almost like a, you know, if I'm going to build all this goodwill, you're operating the business to create goodwill, and you know, and if I can have an asset that protects the goodwill that's going to increase in strength over time, it really is a no-brainer. You know, it's not.
It really is. I mean, the costs aren't that high, and it's just something that needs to be on your checklist.
100%.
So Brian, I've seen these franchise agreements. They're like hundreds of pages, some of them, right? They're really big. But can you kind of just like give a summary of sort of like the parts of what one of these financial FDDs looks like? So what kind of information goes in there, and you know, how much of that do you do? How much of it does the franchisee do, or franchisor do? Can you tell me a little bit about how that process works and what has to go into creating one of these things?
Sure. Yeah. So the FDD, our typical FDD, let's say, is between 200 and 300 pages. And I always like do this, like this is like half a ream of paper. I don't know what, in my head, I always describe it that way. So in that disclosures, there's a couple different sections. So the FDD, the disclosure portion of it, there's 23 items that the federal government says you need to put in here. And it goes by item number. So, right, so item 1 covers corporate structure and local laws and things like that. And the reason why they did that, they said you have to put this information in this section, is because they wanted a mechanism to, if I'm comparing 3 different brands, I want to be able to go to item 1 on each one of the 3 and compare the information equally, right? So they said, not only do you have to include this information, you have to include it in the same spot in each one of your FDDs, right? So that's the disclosure portion of it. That has things like, item 3, any litigation in the last 10 years, or certain litigation that you're involved with. Sometimes it's lifetime, right? So as a prospective franchisee, that would be really important for me to know if you just got arrested for securities fraud 5 years ago, right? And that would be something that they have to disclose. Item 4, bankruptcies. Item 5, fees, right? The initial fees. Item 6, the continuing fees. So they prescribe all these different sections of information. A lot of that information does come from the franchisor, right? This is their dream and this is their concept. We help guide them. We'll do a competitive study and say, we'll compare these 3 of your competitive, your brands that you may be competing with, and let's see how they position themselves. And do we want a high franchise fee or do we want a low franchise fee? Kind of depends on how we want to sell franchises. If we want to use a franchise broker, the broker fees are typically $25,000. So we'd have to account for that in the franchise fee, because they take a big chunk of it. If we're just looking to sell product, we're an ice cream company and we just want to sell ice cream. You may have a client that has zero a franchise fee. They just want to sell a product, right? And that's a way of distribution. So it really, the way the numbers themselves and how we position it, it's always the franchisor's call, just like their business. They can decide whether or not they want to be, fast casual, fast food, fine dining. It's kind of the same thing where we kind of go through that, but we're always guiding them the way we, based on our other clients and industry norms and things like that.
So the franchise disclosure document, then, it's not just a document that you're preparing for the government. It's really the document that the franchisee is going to review when they're making a decision about whether they're going to sign up for the franchise, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So it's all of that disclosed information. And along with that, there's also all of the agreements that they're going to sign in the relationship. So in that packet of 200, 300 pages, there's the franchise agreement. That's going to be the binding document that they're going to sign. There's a confidentiality agreement. There's, ACH forms. There's, anything that they potentially could sign from a legal perspective should be in that packet. So this way the franchisee is making an informed decision, which is the idea of the whole thing, where people were getting ripped off. So this is kind of the reaction to that, where we're saying, okay, here's all the information. There's also a cooling off period. You can't sign or give a check for 14 days. So it gives the prospective franchisee time to review it, go to their lawyer, go to their accountant, whatever the case is. So all these laws are intended to protect the franchisee from getting ripped off.
Yeah, my daughter-in-law wants to buy into a franchise. Apparently it's like at a gym, and they have these harnesses that people put on them with elastic on it, and then they bounce up and down to music and it's like a type of exercise. So they have these exercise routines. I don't know. I kind of think it's a fad. I don't think it's going to go very far, but she's really pumped about it. You have to get a store, and then you have to put in special supports in the ceiling. So, but if she does decide to go forward with it, Brian, I'll send her to you. That's for sure.
Absolutely.
I just kind of get this image of people bouncing up and down to music and doing all it seems like fun, but I don't know if you know, I don't know if that's going to be a long-term fitness trend or not. But so we do have somebody this is Waz says, hi everyone, I have a small chain of bed and breakfast. I'm excited to partner to provide great hospitality and cash flow. So Waz, is this something that you want to franchise, or is this you know, is this something that you would consider franchising as like a string of bed and breakfasts, or are you there?
Yes, I am, and thank you again for the meetup. Really enjoying it. And we so have like a few branches, a couple of them that are partnerships in different regions and one internationally. But we love to start franchising it and do a lot more actually.
So I mean, I guess, Mike, maybe you could go into, you know, it sounds like you've got a successful business already. What kind of, I guess, maybe you could ask our experts, like, what are some of the things you should consider about whether you take the step to go into franchising?
Thank you. And maybe if that's okay, I would love to even add one more question too on that. It seems like the franchising process is very important, and sometimes it can be like, it can involve a lot of paperwork and it can be a bit costly, I guess, depending on the type of business. It seems like I'm wondering, for a business that's like a little bit of a startup, low budget, is there some suggestions from the experts on how to cut down on the cost of the franchising? I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I think is really important before you start franchising is to, as much as possible, have your model nailed down. Because the last thing you want to do is start franchising when you haven't fully worked out your model, and therefore have franchisees who wind up not being successful. Because basically what you want to be able to do is replicate what you've done with your own business, and be able to replicate that through other people doing this same business. So I see a lot of times where people who have, say, one location and they're not yet profitable and they want to franchise their business. And it's like, no, that's not the way to go. You know, you could potentially franchise it even if you only have one location, but it should be profitable, and you should have everything in place so that you can train someone and give them the materials and the support they need to be able to replicate what you've done and to be able to teach them how to do that. So I think that's really important before you actually franchise, is to nail down your model and make sure it's successful. I think in terms of things, Brian would probably be better to talk about how you might be able to minimize costs. I would say that, one of the things to do is that can help minimize costs is to try to think ahead to eventualities so that you can include them in your franchise disclosure document and your franchise agreement. So that way you don't have to keep continually revising the franchise agreement and the franchise disclosure document. You'll still have to revise it no matter how well you think ahead, because there's always going to be things that you didn't think about, but really think about as much as possible, what to include, and your attorney would help you with this, what to include in terms of your franchise agreement. And that way you'll save some costs involved. But I think it's really important that you do this with a trained franchise attorney in terms of doing a franchise agreement, because the last thing you want to do is try to franchise on your own, and then you're going to wind up with all kinds of headaches, including lawsuits and everything else, which is far more expensive than what it would cost you to have a franchise attorney develop the documents for you. But Brian, do you want to add on to that?
Yeah, no, I think what you said was accurate as far as having having your systems in place. And I actually think ultimately that does save you money, because one of the components of a franchise that you're going to eventually have to create is the operations manual. right? The steps that if I'm your franchisee, what are the, what steps do I have to take to operate the business, right? So to Michael's point, you could hire someone to do that. They usually charge, between 10, 15, 25,000 potentially, depending on the complexity of the business. So if you could do that yourself, that's one area that you could potentially do yourself, or have some limited help by a third party that will save you that money. As far as the actual legal documents and things like that, it's a really tough, we get a lot of clients from people who came and tried to do it cheap, and it never really works out, to be honest with you. It's they want to pay, they paid that other company, that these franchise development companies that say I could do your FDD for $5,000, and it's just not. Then they come to, after that doesn't work, they come to us, and then that we want to have to throw it away and redo it anyway. So it's really, I think Michael's point is a good one. Cheap is expensive ultimately. So if you do it right initially, you'll actually be in a much better position. If you try to go too cheap on it, it's going to be, you're going to just create problems. Then you're going to have a misdisclosure for 5 franchisees. You're going to have a lawsuit. You're going to wind up, it's almost like a house of cards. For me, it's build the foundation strong, and you can build, high on that. If if it's a house of cards, it's just going to collapse. You're just delaying the inevitable. So
Yeah,
so
cheap is suspect, right? Cheap is always suspect. So always keep your eyes kind of wide open. Let's stick on some of the bad and the ugly. It's not all rainbows and ponies, right? Michael, maybe you can talk a little bit about, just in general, not pointing to anyone. What if a franchisee steps out of line? Like, what if they, violate their agreement? What if they're not using the trademark the right way? What do you do? How do you, what's the process there?
Yeah, I mean, so, and obviously it would depend on the particular franchise, agreement that you're under. But like for us, if it's something minor, I'll just email them or I'll call them and say, hey, just wanted to let you know you did this and here's the right way to do it or whatever. If it's more serious than that, then, in our franchise agreement, there's a default procedure. They get one default, and then they have time to cure. If they don't cure, then they have a second default. If they don't cure, then they get a third default and they're terminated. And that's typically how it works. But like our franchise agreement is written in such a way that they have plenty of opportunity to kind of right whatever wrong that they've committed. But in I'd say 95% of the situations, an email will just take care of it, because they'll be like, oh, I forgot about that or whatever. I'm real sorry or whatever. And then that's the end of it. And I think part of it also comes in terms of on the other side. So like we have an application procedure to become a franchisee, and we do pretty careful screening of people who become franchisees. We want to make sure that the people that are going to come into the system have the skill set to be successful, and in our view are going to be successful. Third, we also look at, okay, what's their background like? So like, for example, we ask questions of things like, have you ever been convicted of a felony? Have you ever been charged with fraud, things like that. Because obviously if those questions are answered in the affirmative, those are things that raise red flags when you're interviewing someone about whether they should become a franchisee or not. I think looking back, one of the things was, the procedure we have in place now is you fill out an application, then you meet with our prospective franchisee committee, which is composed of our best franchisees. The applicant can ask any questions that they want. The franchisees can ask any questions they want. The franchisees recommend to me whether that person should be approved to franchise. So we leave that in the power of these most successful franchisees. And then it's up to me ultimately whether to accept the recommendation of our prospective franchisee committee. But that process has done very well for us. Looking back, when we first started franchising, we didn't have that process in place. If someone approached me and I felt, hey, they have the skill set, I think they'll be successful, I would grant the franchise. This was back, when we started franchising, but we've become much more sophisticated since then. And today we reject more franchisees than we accept. And that to me is important because there's other franchise systems where as long as you write a check, you're accepted. And then you have to deal with the ramifications of that, which are potentially the person is not successful, the person is going to try to upend the system, the person has a shady background, and that's going to hurt the reputation and credibility of the franchise system as well as the franchisees in it, or the person's buying the franchise for some ulterior motive, and then you have to deal with those kinds of situations. So you really don't want to go down any of those roads. It's much better to, in my view, be selective regarding who you franchise to, and do it the right way.
Yeah, I love that. So I'm just one follow-up question to either you or Brian. So knowing like should you already have that type of acceptance or application process up front, or if you don't, and it then becomes something that you decide later, does everybody have to re-sign their agreements to kind of agree to that process, or you as the franchisor can make that decision unilaterally? You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, and Brian would know more than me, but I mean, to my knowledge, once they're a franchisee, you can't suddenly go back and say, oh, well, now we have an application process and you have to go through it. So like once they're in the system, as long as they're not violating their franchise agreement, they're the franchisee. And that's something that, I think is important for two reasons. One is that you truly own the franchise. So as long as you're abiding by the franchise agreement, the franchisor really can't get you out of the system. And so you have a lot of protections as a franchisee, which I think is important. But that also goes to what I was talking about earlier, because if you let someone into the system who, isn't going to do a good job or you think is going to cause problems, as long as they don't violate the franchise agreement, it's very, very hard to get rid of them. It's kind of like that uncle that you don't want to invite to Thanksgiving, but you're kind of forced to, and you can't get rid of them.
Yes. Brian, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I think Michael's 100% on point. Once you sign, you're kind of locked in. So that vetting process is really important. I actually love that you have the other franchisees kind of chime in. Most people don't do that, and that's a great way for them to have buy-in also, because they're part of the system. When franchising works, it works for everybody. It's the franchisor benefits, franchisees benefit, suppliers benefit. Like it's a really collaborative relationship. So that's a great way to get buy-in from the franchisees, and I think that's smart. That's very smart. Usually, just to tack on to that a little bit, a lot of the franchise agreements will have mandatory mediation procedures, right? But the way that Michael said it is typically how we recommend it. Most of the things we call them like non-compliance letters. You send it's a letter from the franchisor. Say it could be informal, could be the email. Hey, you missed this. This is something that and then it escalates from there. If they don't comply, then it escalates. Then they get a letter from us. Then it's creates more of an issue. But a lot of the franchise agreements do have mandatory mediation and then arbitration provisions, and there is a protocol to getting a franchisee out of the system.
So I just want to take a quick moment and say hello to Lisa Ascalise. She's a friend of the firm. And hi, Lisa. I don't know if you're able to come on camera, but if you can, we'd love to see you.
Hi, Richard. Hi, how are you?
Good to see you. And thank you for joining us. You had a question, right, about services?
Thank you so much for having this incredible class. I've been waiting for this, as I said to David before. I came in kind of in the middle and have been doing meetings, honestly, in between, but didn't want to miss it. So I had a question about franchising services, not just, we talked a little bit about food and restaurants. What about, if I were to franchise Inventor A to Z? So of course I've secured my logo and my, everything that I've needed to trademark, that, Richard. So, that part is done. So what if I just wanted to franchise Inventing A to Z?
Yeah, you could pretty much franchise anything. We have, like I said, 290 clients. I mean, it's everything, any service you could think of, dog grooming to mobile dog grooming to we actually have one, sadly, when your pet dies, there's a service that they help you with that process of, right, and they franchise that. So when you're dealing with services, it's really about, there's a lot of times no brick and mortar, where people operate out of their homes potentially, or you could require an office. And it's really about systems, and I think Michael's a good example of that. He's not necessarily, selling anything like a retail or food, which is what people, traditionally think about. I think he has a novel concept, and it's just really a way of expanding. If you can't do the expansion yourself, it's just one option for that. But you could really, there's no limitation really, as to the type of business that you can franchise. So you're fine, you would be fine with that. And the system, or the thing that you're franchising actually is the operations component to it. How would you duplicate your business and have someone else run it?
Right.
And the marketing that you do, the client services, the deliverables, whatever the case is.
So what I would need is somebody to carve that out if I were to do that. So carve that out and structure what that needs to look like financially, because that's the end goal, right? To figure out how much revenue you make, what is the upfront from the people you're franchising to, right? What does that structure look like?
And that's part of the FDD process. So item 7 covers the initial investment. What is a prospective franchisee going to have to pay to get involved, right? So they go through, leasehold improvements, equipment, service vehicles, insurance, right? So you have a range. So you have to work through that. We help you with that. There's franchise consultants that help you with that. Some, it's kind of depending. So that's part of the process. And then in item 19, that's where you show how much revenue you can make. That item 19 is the one item that is discretionary. Not, if you have a franchise system, you don't have to show that. You show anyone's numbers. But essentially, as David was saying, the FDD is not only a legal document, it's kind of in my opinion, part of a sales document as well, right? So it's really hard to sell a franchise if you can't show how much money you can make. So without that item 19, people do it. It makes the process more difficult. So between the item 7 would be the initial investment, and then you have the item 19, which would be how much money could I make? And you have some leeway as to what information you want to provide. You could just do gross sales. You could do a full P&L. It kind of varies, or you don't have to show any at all. But the downside of not having one is that you're not supposed to talk. You can't talk about it, right? So if you don't have an item 19, you're not allowed to tell a prospect, oh, you can make, $500,000. So if you don't show your item 19, you can't talk about it. And that's but it's really kind of positioning yourself and planning those things out and having those conversations.
Well, thank you so much. One more question. So who does the marketing for this? You can have a franchise, you can put a franchise together, and is your company helping to market the business? How can they find the franchise?
Yeah, we do have, we do help with some components of it, but the real market, it kind of depends. So there's a few different ways to sell franchises. One is organically. Typically, those are the first few, right? You have someone that really wants to join, or what Michael was saying, he's operating the business, and then he just has some people that want to just come on board. So they love how could I do this? And so that's usually the first few franchisees are organic, because you really need to build that foundation and kind of learn. It's like learning a new business. Like you have to learn how to support franchisees and learn the process and learn, so there's a learning curve there. Once you do that, though, there's a few different ways. Usually franchise consultants, franchise brokers are a big way of selling franchises. and they have this whole network, right? So you rely on the franchise brokers to vet, find prospects, vet them, go through that process so you don't have to, and then they'll just say, Lisa, we have this prospect, we think it's a good fit, here you go. And then if you wind up signing with them, you pay that broker commission. The commission is high, so you usually want to come in with a higher franchise fee, but the commissions are typically 25,000, per client, but that saves you the cost of trying to do it yourself. And then they have franchise shows. There's the IFE that's happening in the Jacob Javits Center next week, where you can walk around. There'll be a bunch of different, you can have a booth there, and that you have prospects that are walking around. You can try to sell them. We highly recommend, and this is where we help a little bit with having a website with the drip campaign, and those types of things that you have to do on the back end, because you'll get leads, but if you don't follow up with them and don't do anything with them, they're not going to sign. So it's a long process, as I'm sure Michael can tell you. By the time you get the contact, by the time they sign a franchise agreement, I think the average is like 6 months. I heard, 6. It could be even 8 months. I don't even know, but it is a long road.
Thank you. Can you just repeat that acronym, please? You said at Jacob Javits next week. What is the IFB, and what's that stand for?
International Franchise Expo. So it's basically all franchisors who are exhibiting, and there's a lot of them. And they'll just have prospective if I'm interested in a franchise, I go there and I could walk and talk to all the people, in their booths, and ask them about, they get literature and talk about the franchise. And then, and as a franchisor, you're collecting leads and kind of working through that. But it's just like an expo of potential franchises out there.
That's great. And of course, we intentionally timed this presentation to coincide with the International Franchise Expo.
Hello.
I'm kind of making that up a little bit, but I did want to move to Evelyn Kushiara. Good to see you, Evelyn. And you had a couple questions, one about moving out of state and the other about costs for starting a franchise.
Right, exactly. So my question was, I'm moving from New Jersey to Maryland. I have a business where I organize playrooms. I'm literally the only person who does this. My company name is The Toy Tamer, which is trademarked. And so I have a huge following here in New Jersey. I'm moving to Maryland. I want to take my business with me to there, but I don't want to leave my customers and the whole, whatever you want to call it, that I created up here. So what are my options? Is it only franchising? I never even knew something called licensing existed. Like, what are the options?
If you want to sell and have someone else operate the business, there's really two here. There's a few different options. One is franchising, which we were talking about. The other is having a management structure. Right. So, for example, Starbucks is not a franchise. A lot of people think it is, but they just have a management hierarchy that allows them to operate all these different locations. So you may say, I'm still the owner. I could hire a manager just to run this company. I'm going to pay, $70,000 a year, and whatever the case is. So you're keeping the business yourself. So that's more like a management structure. Those are really two, the only other alternative would be kind of similar to the management structure, would be take on a partner, or maybe you want to have a partner that buys in and can operate the business while you go operate the other location. But you're really limited if that person wants to use your trademark and your goodwill, you're limited as to what you can really do with that, because the knee-jerk reaction is, well, I'll license my name to this person and do it that way. But if you're licensing the name and actually care what happens, right, you're in that control, aspect of it. Now you're a franchise pretty much. So you don't have too many alternatives other than bringing on a partner or a manager or franchising.
Great. And my other half of the question is, what approximately does it cost to franchise a business? I mean, rumor has it costs a whole lot of money. I mean, my business is successful. I make money at it, but will I lose it all by trying to franchise it all?
It's a good question. To me, it's, I when I tell people what they should expect to have if they're launching, I say between 100 and 150,000. I think that it's a good number. Not that it costs that much to start, because let's say, for example, that FDD packet, we charge in the ballpark of 25,000, let's say. So that's the legal portion of it. We spread it out over payments. That's not the killer. Then you have the operations manual, right? Like we spoke about. That can run, from 0 to 25,000, let's say. That's the even for ourselves, I have franchise, ownership in franchises. I hire someone to do the ops manual. I'm never doing that. It's just as big as the FDD usually, and it's just too time consuming. So we hire somebody. I pay someone to do it, even though I have a million forms I can use. It's just not worth the time for me. Then you have if you want to sell in registration states, you also need audited financials for the franchising company. But we have someone that does it for $2,500, let's say. If your accountant doesn't do it, or is more expensive. So those are really the three required things. So let's assume 50,000 is the number to get to not do the operations manual yourself, to do the FDD, and to get your audited financials. So that's the 50,000, let's say, baseline. Then you have the reason why I would say you need more is for that marketing. You don't want to just be in a situation where just having those pieces of paper doesn't do anything. It's really about selling the business. Now, in your case, it might be a little different, where you could set up the franchise. You could actually sell that location as the first franchise outlet, and then you kind of recoup a lot of the money, and you have a franchisee, and then you can go open up a new territory in Maryland. So that might be a little unique, where you can make some money on the sale, and that could be helpful to cover some of these costs and get those initial franchise fees, so you don't have to market as much. But typically, you don't want to be just left with those documents, and that's what a lot of law firms and franchise development companies do. They'll just say, here you go, here's a bunch of paper, and just say, see you later, right? But I don't like to do that, because my goal is to help you be successful at franchising. So you need that extra cushion for, you're also going to have support issues. You may have to hire somebody as you grow. There's going to be other expenses and things like that. So you want to be left with that cushion to do it right.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
I have a question.
Sure.
Okay, so we have time for 2 more questions, and then I think we're going to wrap things up.
May I?
Please go ahead, David.
Oh, thank you very much. So once again, my name is David. I am taxi cab burger food truck. Now, I know why I turned to franchising and why I've gotten involved. I have an FDD. I have an operations manual. I've been in contact with the company who put this whole thing together, and I have a lot of money invested. I've been to a franchise show. This franchise company dropped the ball, and now in hindsight, I think I made a mistake. Why does one, again, I know why I went in, think I want franchising, but tell me, why should one go into the franchising business?
Unfortunately, like that's what I think the problems happen when you just get those documents and just are a legal franchise, but don't have a plan to sell franchises. Right, that has to be connected, or else that's the situation we try to avoid, where you just have this, you're legally able to sell. So I have clients that are selling in private equity. They've been open for 8 years, let's say. They're selling for 65 million, on their private equity. So there is a risk, but there's also a lot of upside, to that. So that's, unfortunately, there are ways to undo what you're going through and try to get some sales. I'm not a huge fan of the franchise shows by themselves. I think they have to be part of another plan, right? And those are the drip campaigns and having a website and constantly being in front of people. And, so the franchise show by itself is really not going to do a lot for you. Just like having a good website is not going to do anything for you by itself. It's a combination of a bunch of different things. But that's why I talk about that budget, right? That 50,000, 100,000 budget, so you can figure out what that is for you as you help develop it. So, and even Michael has, what was it, 95 franchisees?
Yeah.
You know, so it does work. It does require a lot of money. It does require a lot of bandwidth, but if you do it right, it does work. But sometimes it doesn't, just like any other business, you know. It's definitely not a guarantee for sure.
So one last question, Anatole Norland put couple questions out on the chat. Anatole, do you want to address us, or do you want us just to go off your chat?
Yeah, sure. Happy to speak to my question. Again, thank you for the amazing session. Lots of valuable information, engaging discussion, a lot of stuff to think about. So we spoke a lot about the systems in place, the operations, the management, how you're engaging people, how you're keeping them in line. Could you speak a little bit to the systems in place that you've seen to manage and engage the franchisees, whether that's on the communication side, visibility into the operations, the metrics, the compliance to what people are doing, what they have to stay in line with? Do you see that generally happening through email and intranet, maybe a specific software system? And I feel like a lot of that depends on the type of business, but I know there's certain standards that have to be kept in place and tracked.
Michael, do you want to?
Yeah, sure. So it really depends on the particular kind of franchise it is. I mean, I can speak in terms of Tap Into. We have all of our technology is all custom built. We have 4 full-time developers who not only have built our website and maintain our website, but are constantly putting out new features for our franchisees, for our readers, for our advertisers. We also have, we do not only initial training for all of our franchisees, we have continuing education every month where we do live webinars that are recorded for our franchisees. So if they can't be on them live, they can listen to them later. We do bi-weekly franchisee calls that are where all the franchisees are invited. Those are also recorded. So if they can't be on them live, they can watch them later. We have 2 monthly optional meetings for franchisees. We have a franchisee roundtable where we give a tip of the month and talk about it. And then we are open for any kind of questions. I also have a CEO roundtable every month where it's just me and the franchisees, and they can provide any kind of feedback, any suggestions, et cetera, one-on-one with me. We also have, in addition to those vehicles, we have chat rooms and we have Google Workspace, so the franchisees can seamlessly communicate with each other and with us. Our customer service team is available 24/7 via text, call, email for the franchisees if they have questions, if they need help. I'm available on the sales side for any sales questions, if they want me to look at a proposal before it goes to an advertiser. We have a director of content, and they're there if a franchisee has a content question, if they want the director of content to look at a story before it goes live, they want to brainstorm a story, et cetera. We also take care of all the billing, all the credit card processing for the franchisees. We provide them with an editable media kit, contracts, everything that they need. And as I mentioned before, the marketing materials at cost as well. So we really try to provide kind of soup to nuts, everything that they can possibly need and every support measure that we've possibly thought of, so that they really are able to kind of, I guess you would say, execute the model and be successful. And that to us is very, very important. But those systems in place are critical. If we didn't have the communication vehicles that we have, people would not be on the same page. They wouldn't know about different new features that come out or new policies or, hey, here's how to deal with a situation, et cetera. And so this way we're all on the same page. And this is in addition to obviously our operating manual, which everybody has and reads and we revise every year as well. So to me, those systems, both the technology, the written system, the written documents, video, we have an intranet where there's all kinds of training materials and they can access anything that they need from the intranet as well. These are all critical to our success.
That's awesome.
Amazing. It sounds like you put, I guess being in the news business, you do put a premium on communication. And so you seem to be doing that really, really well. It's very impressive what you've built. So,
Well, thank you.
And I think that, you know, that may not be completely analogous for every franchise, but it does seem like that level of communication and building that community has been a big part of your success. So.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's a lot more than a lot of the other franchise systems do. But I love that because I think that's the essence of it right there. It's almost like a mastermind group of how do we make this successful, and you hit all of them. So that's a great job.
Thanks, Brian.
David.
Hi, everyone. We're going to end. Thank you so much to Michael and Brian. We will have another ESS next month, again, on the last Thursday of the month, 12 p.m. Eastern. You will be receiving notification of that. And this recording will be sent to everyone and be posted on our YouTube channel. Our next topic will be all about intellectual property myths. There's a lot out there. And so Richard and I will be debunking a lot of them. If you have any ideas for future ESS programs, do let us know. Brian and Michael, how can people get in touch with you? Maybe you can chat that in the chat. That would be great if you have not done that already. Michael has something we will Michael has a one-pager that we will share when we send out the recap, so you will get their contact information there as well if you've missed it and you're listening to this recording. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Richard, Brian, Michael. Thank you for everybody for attending. We're really excited that you came. We hope you learned something. If you didn't, Brian, myself, Michael, and Richard can maybe fill in some of the blanks. Take care. Have a great weekend. Have a nice Memorial Day, and we'll see you all soon. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Thank you,
Have a
David.
great day.